Maybe this way, 'cause this is a weirder way to do it. Okay. Might be scary.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our event tonight. We're really looking forward to a wonderful evening together as we ring in another Constitution Day celebration here at Viterbo University. My name is John Smalley, and this... Yeah, I didn't know my brother was here. Wait a minute. This year, I'm the chair of the board for a La Crosse-based nonprofit organization called Leader Ethics. This is the third year in a row that Leader Ethics and Viterbo have partnered to create a Constitution Day program. Our main purpose at Leader Ethics is to support and really to expect and to demand ethical behavior from our elected officials at all levels. At Leader Ethics, we believe elected officials should be truthful, be transparent with public information, be unifiers rather than dividers, and be willing to represent the collective interests of all of their constituents. We're especially thrilled with our program this year as we're bringing together national caliber experts to help us explore the ever-changing landscape of local media and local news coverage. As a retired newspaper editor myself, at papers in Iowa as well as here in La Crosse and in Madison, this topic is very close to my heart. For years now, our speakers tonight have all been navigating the endless changes to the local news model, some financially driven, some culturally driven, and some technologically driven. And each of our panelists brings a unique perspective that involves creative efforts to find new ways to deal with the challenges of our local news. We're also pleased to let you know that we are seeking your input tonight as part of the program. We're going to have time for a Q&A session at the end of our program tonight, and we encourage all of you to fill out any questions you might have by the cards that were provided when you came in. I hope you've got those, and we'll be coming around later in the program to take those cards from you, and then they'll be asked up here. Later, our program moderator, Ezra Klein, Ezra Wall, who you're going to just meet in a minute here. Not Ezra Klein. Yeah, he said he'd take it, but no, it is Ezra Wall. Ezra is a La Crosse-based regional manager, editor, and host for Wisconsin Public Radio. And he'll be addressing your questions with the panelists at the end of our program. So speaking of which, please now allow me to introduce our most excellent set of panelists here. First up, with a short overview talk, will be George Stanley. George is the CEO of Wisconsin Watch, a Madison-based nonprofit news organization that provides investigative content and other information for free for media outlets all across Wisconsin. George is the former editor of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel and truly is a national expert on matters of local news coverage. Following George's remarks, Ezra Wall, that is, will engage with the panelists on the stage here for about a half an hour or so, and then we'll move into the Q&A session with all of you. Our panel tonight consists of David Steffler, who is a Viterbo graduate and a former editor of the La Crosse Tribune, who is now the CEO of the Springfield Daily Citizen, a nonprofit, a subscription-based digital news organization in Springfield, Missouri. I have been following David's adventures very closely the past 3.5 years that he's been in Springfield, and it really is quite remarkable what he and his news team down there, which is now actually larger than the local daily newspaper, what they've accomplished in Springfield is really something. I'm anxious to hear more about it tonight. Next, Kathy Obradovich is a longtime Iowa journalist. She's the editor-in-chief for the Des Moines-based Iowa Capital Dispatch, a nonprofit news org that is devoted to creating quality community journalism and filling gaps when other organizations aren't covering a certain topic. When I was an editor in Iowa way back in the day, Kathy was our company's State House bureau chief in Des Moines. She's a proven leader and really an exceptional journalist. And unlike many online news sites, the Capital Dispatch does not include a paywall or advertising. Our third panelist tonight is a La Crosse-based television leader, charged with providing quality local news coverage for this community, as well as Eau Claire and the surrounding areas. Chris Palmer is Vice President and General Manager at WKBT News 8 Now in La Crosse. Chris will share with us tonight some of the strategies that he and his team have employed to expand their local news coverage. Following the Q&A session with our panelists, former La Crosse Tribune editor and publisher and the Leader Ethics board member, Rusty Cunningham, will offer a few remarks, and then Lee Rosh, the executive director of Leader Ethics, will close out our evening. Finally, before George takes the podium, just a brief note about our partners for this event. Leader Ethics is a big believer in collaboration and partnerships in events such as this, and tonight's list of supporting partners is, I think, really impressive. In addition to our great host, Viterbo University, and thanks again for all the many efforts going on with the Viterbo staff here tonight to make this event take place. Our other sponsors for the evening are the Great Rivers United Way, La Crosse Area Chamber of Commerce, La Crosse Area Community Foundation, La Crosse Public Education Foundation, UW La Crosse, Western Technical College, the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association, and the Wisconsin Newspaper Association. Thank you again to all of our sponsors for your support, and really thanks especially to all of you for being here tonight as we dig into this important topic regarding the fate and the future of local news coverage. And now, to kick the evening off, please welcome to the stage George Stanley.
Thank you, John. Can you hear me in the back? So recently we've seen Midwestern lawmakers and young social influencers targeted for assassination, troops corralling protesters on American streets, a U.S. senator being handcuffed and hauled away from a public event, news outlets being sued and threatened, lies, propaganda, and doctored videos raging through social networks. Across our state and nation, more and more of the information people receive is bitter and dividing. New technologies have changed the way people shop, advertise, and search for information. Social feeds are driven by algorithms that grab and hold attention by fueling passions, especially anger and lust. These same changes have undermined the business model that long financed local news outlets, the sources that inform communities, connect neighbors, and nurture civic life. This all contributes to the fracturing of our communities, to folks not getting the information they need to navigate everyday challenges, and to declining trust that our democracy still works at finding solutions. You can see it in annual Gallup polls measuring trust in our institutions. Since the late 1970s, folks who say they trust the news media a great deal or a fair amount has dropped from 72% to 31%. Likewise, trust in the medical system has plunged from 72% to 31%. In church and organized religion, from 64% to 32%. In public schools, from 53% to 29%. In banks, from 60% to 27%. In Congress, from 40% to 9%. More and more of us feel overwhelmed by headlines from social feeds, national outlets, and national chains posing as local news channels. Yet we don't know much of what's happening in our neighborhoods, cities, and counties. What's missing isn't news about the worst thing happening in the world at the moment, or the most sensational uttering of the president, or what an algorithm pumps into our feeds. What's missing is honest reporting on where most of our tax dollars are spent, and where decisions that shape our everyday lives are made, in school board meetings, in city halls, in state houses, in gatherings of people of goodwill trying to make things better. At its core, this has been a market failure caused by technological innovation in a society that relies on the marketplace to fill its needs until it can't. The local commerce advertising model that supported local news for 2 centuries has collapsed, and the consequences are dire. When communities lose their local news, civic engagement drops, corruption goes unchecked, government waste increases, polarization deepens, people lose faith in democracy and its institutions. Our democratic republic, more than other forms of government, relies on trust and truth. The founders of our republic overcame an entitled king and the world's strongest military. They knew that tyrants grasp power by controlling the stories told to the people they rule. They understood how critical a well-informed citizenry would be to success of self-government. They gave us the First Amendment to the Constitution so that citizens without political power would be free to tell one another what was really going on. They worried in those early years how people in small towns and rural areas outside of Boston, Philadelphia, and New York would receive enough news and information to make sound decisions and keep control over their government. So the first Postal Act, signed into law by President George Washington, provided free delivery of newspapers, a government subsidy of local news as a public service. This helped sow the seeds of a local news industry that would expand to serve a growing population of people arriving from across the globe in search of liberty. Local commerce did the rest, from people selling to their neighbors through classified ads, to retailers advertising their wares to everyone within driving distance of their stores. This business model supported news reporters who covered police and fires, zoning and planning commissions, school boards, village councils, county boards, elections, and community events from our smallest towns to our biggest cities until the 21st century. The collapse of that business model happened so quickly that we haven't had time to adjust or even to understand what it means. In 1999, I was managing editor of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel when its sales and profits hit heights they would never reach again. Classified ads of neighbors selling to neighbors filled multiple print sections. The three largest retail advertisers then for the Journal-Sentinel were the Boston Store, American TV, and Circuit City. Craigslist was just a startup in the San Francisco Bay Area, offering free online ads for folks selling cars, boats, and services. They supported their small staff with revenue from display advertising next to all those free classifieds. Amazon at that time sold one product, printed books. Over the next decade, Craigslist and imitators would spread like windswept wildfires to every city and then every town, sucking the classified ads out of every local newspaper in America. On the retail side, Circuit City closed in the Great Recession. When American TV shut down a few years later, its family owners said their stores had become showrooms for Amazon. Folks would come in, see a product they liked, Google their cell phone to find it on sale at a lower price somewhere in the world, and order it right then and there to be delivered to their homes. Boston Store, a fixture in Milwaukee since the 1890s, strived to stay alive by buying other department store chains and finding economies of scale, but succumbed in 2018. By that time, the Journal-Sentinel, which traced its roots to before Milwaukee was a city and Wisconsin was a state, had been sold to a national media chain based in Cincinnati, then spun off to a newspaper chain based in Washington, D.C., which itself was gobbled up by a hedge fund-controlled chain that acquired Gannett's assets and name. The same thing was happening almost everywhere. Green Bay, for example, used to be home to Prangies, Prangieway, and Shopko, and they're all gone. Every major daily newspaper in Wisconsin is now owned by a distant cost-cutting chain, as are nearly all commercial broadcast outlets and most community weeklies. We've lost more than 6 out of 10 journalists in Wisconsin and nationwide, but it's worse than that because most of the journalists left are clustered in our biggest cities. There, they're chasing the same stories, highlighting the most tragic events and the most polarizing political conflicts, while also attracting viewers with nonstop coverage of entertainment, celebrities, and sports. An average of 2 local newspapers in America have been closing each week for the past 15 years. About half of our nation's counties have only one news outlet left, and hundreds have none. The smaller and less wealthy the community, the bigger the losses. Gannett owns the legacy newspapers of 11 Wisconsin cities, and they've just offered another buyout to their employees. And the last remaining journalist left in Wausau is taking it. There are no journalists based in Oshkosh or Fond du Lac or Stevens Point, despite the local mastheads remaining on their daily newspapers and websites, which are filled with news from other places. At the same time, Wisconsin has become one of just 7 swing election states that determine which party and their backers win control over branches of the federal government. As a result, we attract huge volumes of attack ads and misleading propaganda from those seeking national power and influence. Political websites disguised as nonpartisan news outlets have proliferated. Our state and local elections and public discussions increasingly reflect the bitter us against them dysfunction we see at the national level. Take, for example, the circus of a nonpartisan state Supreme Court election that we witnessed this past spring. Misleading attack ads dominated TV and radio. Campaign text alerts buzzed over our phones. Faraway billionaires with personal agendas spent tens of millions to elect one judge in a place they might have flown over. The world's richest man, born and raised in South Africa and now living in Texas, donned a cheese head while passing out million-dollar checks to Wisconsin voters. $100 million was spent on that nonpartisan state election. In the early 21st century, about $3 or $4 million was spent on a Supreme Court election, just as an example. As the Constitution was being ratified in 1787, Ben Franklin was asked, "What have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" A republic, he famously responded, "if you can keep it." To keep our republic, we must revive our local news ecosystem. Given the huge loss of reporters covering local government and community life, we need to begin by nurturing collaborative efforts where newsrooms work together to tell the local and state stories that matter most. As a Wisconsin-based nonprofit with a mission of providing impactful reporting and sharing it freely, Wisconsin Watch is a news outlet in best position to support this revival across our state, working with everybody else. We'll need help from all who can provide it. Here's a quick sampling of what we hope to do with support from members, donors, and everyone who cares about rejuvenating democracy and civic life in Wisconsin. We launched a State House Bureau that is providing evidence-based reporting and fact-checking to more than 200 news outlets across the state. We're not duplicating what others are doing, but providing key accountability stories that otherwise would not be reported. We're building an in-depth investigative team to offer our services to all newsrooms in the state that no longer have the manpower to dig deep. If a local news outlet or citizen suspects incompetence, wrongdoing, corruption, bring it to Wisconsin Watch. In addition to shining a light on the problem, we'll search for examples of places doing a better job tackling similar challenges. We're working to serve accurate, fact-based state and local news to folks wherever they get their information. That includes sharing video summaries of key news stories on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. It includes audio fact checks shared freely with commercial and public radio stations, reaching rural areas with low internet usage. We're adding local journalists to fill news deserts. In Milwaukee, we merged and joined forces with Neighborhood News Service. In Northeast Wisconsin, we're working in collaboration with 5 commercial, for-profit, and nonprofit newsrooms and the Greater Green Bay Community Foundation. We're listening to learn folks' most pressing local news needs, and then we'll find ways to fill them and get that information to the folks who need it most through the channels they're using. We're raising money to fill key reporting gaps. This will include training citizen observers to objectively take notes and ask questions at public meetings and hearings where there aren't enough journalists to cover the ground. It will include reporting beats focused on public service, major challenges people are facing, solutions folks are bringing to the table, key issues such as the challenge of today's housing market, affordable child and elder care, the skills and education needed for family supporting jobs and how to get them. We hope to replicate our regional news bureaus across the state as the impact of this work proves its value. Alexis de Tocqueville came to America 200 years ago from France to explain to his peers in Europe how this new experiment in democracy was working. He saw firsthand how messy things can get, how hard it can be to build consensus with so many points of view and competing interests in play. So when a German gentleman asked him how America had become so enlightened, Tocqueville shook his head. He said, "The greatness of America lies not in being more enlightened than any other nation, but rather in her ability to repair her faults." How do we repair those faults? I've seen long-standing and seemingly insurmountable challenges overcome when 3 things are present. Enough people see and understand the problem to get the attention of responsible parties. Enough people care about the problem to demand better. And folks can see a roadmap to success, examples where people have tackled similar problems more effectively with evidence to back it up. When these three things are present, political partisanship tends to dissipate, and people of goodwill come together to build better ways. When all three elements are not present, the inertia of doing things the way they've always been done remains in charge. So no matter what problem is most important to you to address in our democracy, you'll need honest reporters to inform the public, show how the problem is affecting real people, and highlight better ways. Otherwise, you're likely to grow frustrated that you spend so much time, money, and energy and things never seem to get better. As Alberto Bargan, the longtime head of the Knight Foundation, puts it, whatever your first priority, journalism needs to be your second, because that's how to make a difference and make improvements in our democracy. It's time to support public service journalism in the same way we support our libraries, the arts, and other civic treasures essential to quality of life, to nurturing community, and to ensuring that government of the people, by the people, for the people does not perish from the earth. Sarah Beth Berman, head of the American Journalism Project, one of our supporters, puts it this way: this is not the story of a dying industry. It is a story of a country choosing to rebuild its civic life, one newsroom, one community at a time. I love her emphasis on the key elements of choice and action, because a lot of folks don't think about that until it's pointed out in a powerful way. We are a democracy. The government at all levels works for us when we do our part. We can act to change things. We don't have to be resigned and accept the way things are as inevitable. We're in charge if we choose to be. America struggled through similar challenges more than a century ago when the Industrial Revolution dramatically shifted massive wealth into the hands of a very few people. The two political parties and the wealthy and powerful forces that supported them fostered polarization, disinformation, and benefited from us against them tactics. The highly partisan yellow press of the Gilded Age behaved very much like the angry partisans in our social feeds today. But then responsible grown-ups of goodwill took back control, one community, one state at a time. Our state was a leader in this movement with people like Fighting Bob La Follette, and also with the nation's first journalism school in Madison, to encourage nonpartisan, fact-based reporting that informed the good people of Wisconsin. It's time for us all to do our part again. Thank you very much for having me here tonight.
George Stanley, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. I echo John's thanks to Viterbo for hosting this event tonight, to Leader Ethics, and to all the rest of the sponsors for putting it on. Thank you very much for being here. You can find the work of George's team at Wisconsin Watch online at wisconsinwatch.org. And I'm going to, through the course of the evening, introduce everybody else's online contact information as well. I'm Ezra Wall, not Ezra Klein. I work here in La Crosse. I was born and raised here, and 6 years ago got the opportunity of my life to come back here to my hometown and work here for Wisconsin Public Radio. And you can find everything we do at WPR.org. You heard introductions of our panelists. David Steffler is next to George, and Kathy Obradovich is next to him, and then Chris Palmer here to my immediate left. And I'm going to give them a little chance to introduce each of their organizations. Let's start with Chris, since you're closest. When it's your turn to speak, by the way, just take one of those microphones and hand it off to the next person. There you go. So, my intro question for everybody, and Chris is again the vice president and GM at WKBT, which you can find at news8000.com. Chris, tell us about your organization and how you see your primary service to our local audience here.
Sure. Thank you everyone for being here. I got my predecessor sitting out here, so I'm really nervous now. You should have sat back there where I couldn't see anybody. First of all, I want to say a couple things. We are a Wisconsin-owned and operated based company. I just want to point that out. There are broadcasters, many broadcasters that are based in Wisconsin, that are active in communities all over Wisconsin. I also want to thank the WBA, Wisconsin Broadcasters Association, which I'm a member and on the board that represents, for sponsoring this, but also for representing as a voice at state level and the national level, a lot of hardworking local radio and television journalists and stations. And then first of all, or lastly, I want to say, I'm not a journalist. I just want to make that clear. I'm not a journalist. Sometimes I joke in the newsroom, I'm not a journalist, but I watch a lot of news, and I love news, and so I've always really enjoyed my career in television. So I just wanted to say those things. What was your question?
The question is, tell us about your organization
mission,
and
yeah.
how you serve the community.
So Morgan Murphy Media, we have stations and radio clusters around the country. We own, obviously this station, we own WISC in Madison, Wisconsin as well. And then we have a radio cluster in Platteville, Wisconsin. So very strong in the south central and western side of the state. Look, we have a mission to serve the public. That's our job. Our job every day, 7 days a week, is to report on western Wisconsin, and that's what we do. We have hardworking journalists, assignment managers, reporters, meteorologists, news directors, assistant news director, photojournalists every day out covering pretty wide area, from Prairie du Chien all the way up to Rice Lake, and I've never been to Ladysmith, but I hear it's a real place. I'll get up there one of these days. Over into Minnesota a little bit, and over to Toma and Austin. That's where we report, that's what we cover, and we cover lots of events. We do nearly 150 to 200 stories a day, not all in person, but what we report on the newsroom. We are 50% a television station, but our business has changed a lot. We are now 50% a digital media company as well, because we followed the audience there.
Thanks, Chris. Kathy Obradovich is here from the Iowa Capital Dispatch, which you can find online at iowacapitaldispatch.com. Kathy, same question to you.
All right. Yeah, thanks so much. So I really feel like Iowa Capital Dispatch actually has a mission beyond just making money for shareholders. And that was an attraction for me. I had worked for publicly traded news companies for 32 years, 16 years at the Lee Enterprises, where I worked with Rusty Cunningham and John Smalley and David Stoffler. And so it's really been fun to be here tonight with them. But 16 years at Gannett at the Des Moines Register as well, and watched over the years the newsrooms get smaller and smaller and smaller, the news product getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and the topics that we were able to cover, fewer and fewer and fewer. And so State's Newsroom, which owns Iowa Capital Dispatch, we're not national, not-for-profit. It was really founded in reaction to that reality, which George described so eloquently, where there are in state houses around the country fewer and fewer reporters covering important news about your taxes and your schools and things that are really touching everybody's lives. In fact, one of the states where State's Newsroom founded a newsroom, there were no reporters covering the Capitol full-time, zero. That was in Montana. So really our mission is to provide state news coverage that has eroded over the years. I think somebody mentioned that we don't have paywall, we don't have advertising. It's because we're donor supported. So as a not-for-profit, we're donor supported. But also, we also give our content for free to other news media. We feel like that's part of being part of the solution in terms of helping community newspapers or community, and also community radio stations actually, and some of the biggest TV news station in Iowa republishes our content on their website. So And we feel like that frees up some of those reporters, first of all, to spend their time doing what they do best, which is covering their communities. But secondly, I hear from editors all the time that they would have zero coverage of the State House, issues that their people care about. And, really sometimes like news about their local lawmakers. They would have none of that because they couldn't afford the Associated Press. And frankly, this Associated Press doesn't cover that stuff anyway anymore. So that is our mission. We are, like Ezra mentioned, we're at iowacapitoldispatch.com. We have a sister newsroom here in Wisconsin, Wisconsin Examiner. Similar model where we're basically trying to cover stories that aren't being covered anymore, mostly focused on state government, but also covering other topics around the state. So thanks.
Thanks, Kathy. David Steffler is here from Springfield Daily Citizen, Springfield, Missouri, in case there are Simpsons fans wondering which Springfield it is. And they're online at sgfcitizen.org. David, the same question comes to you. How do you see your role serving your local audience there in Springfield?
Yeah, thank you, Ezra, and it's great to be back home and to see so many friends in the audience here tonight. Really appreciate it. 17, 18 years ago, when Wisconsin Watch was formed, it was one of a handful of nonprofit news organizations in the entire country. The folks who founded it, Andy and Dee Hall from the State Journal in Madison, were friends of mine, and it was really an unusual, weird idea. And they managed to get a grant from a foundation in Oklahoma for like $125,000 in order to start the thing. And I don't know what your American Journalism Project grant is, but I know it's a lot more than that. There are now more than 400, almost 500 nonprofit news organizations across the country. Many of them, like Kathy's nonprofit, are focused on certain issues. A lot of former journalists, people who got laid off from the legacy newspaper, went out and started a nonprofit to basically try to make a living, and usually they're focusing on one or two issues. The Daily Citizen is different. We're different on a lot of different ways. In a way, we're actually a test of whether the old model of daily news journalism can make it in the nonprofit world. We are a nonprofit. We were founded by a group of community people in Springfield, Missouri, who were really concerned about the future of news in their community. The Gannett newspaper was declining rapidly. The local television stations had also consolidated, so there was less news being covered. And there was a real concern about, will public affairs, the basics of local government, continue to be covered by journalists who actually verify facts and produce original information, not just relying on press releases. So I was asked to come back to Springfield. I had been the editor of the paper there for 4 years in 2010 to 2014. And I was asked to come back to create what has become the Springfield Daily Citizen. When I got to Springfield, the Gannett paper still had 17 people associated with their newsroom. Today, there are 4. And they're good people. They work hard, but there's only 4 of them. Our newsroom has 10 full-time journalists. We're supported through donations. We also are a subscription model, which is unlike a lot of the nonprofits. Most of the nonprofits provide their content for free. We believe people ought to be willing to pay for it. And we think that's going to be a way we can support it for the long run. But we're testing that. We're testing whether we can make all that work. And we're trying to provide generally a comprehensive kind of coverage. So we have sports, we have business, we have local government coverage, we have features, we have about a freelance budget that equates to about 2 more full-time reporters and photographers. So we have roughly 12 journalists working every day to produce a comprehensive coverage for the community. And a key thing that we're also trying to do is reestablish the news organization as a part of the community and not above the community, but also not run by folks who are in another state. You know, again, I applaud Chris here and the work that WKBT is continuing to do and be involved in the community, but we're invested in the community. I'm involved in a lot of things in the community. My board members are involved in a lot of things in the community. But in the end, it's all going to come back around to, will the community support us? We're up to 3,600 paid subscribers after 3.5 years. We'd like to get to somewhere around 5,000 to 6,000. We think if we can get there, we can be sustainable. 5,500 or 6,000 people would only be 5% of the households in our county. So it doesn't seem like a big ask, people. Would 5%, shouldn't 5% of the households care enough about what's going on in the community to want to support that in some way? And that's what we're really testing. We're really trying to test, will enough people in the community stand up and be willing to pay something? $100 a year is our full subscription rate. You know, that's not really very expensive when you compare it to your cable TV bill or your streaming, all of your streaming services. So anyway, that's what we're about in Springfield.
All right, and we're not ignoring George on the end. We're going to fold George back in during the audience Q&A, which mentioning that gives me an opportunity to remind you, if you have the little note cards that you got when you got in, if you have questions or comments or ideas that you think could add more to the local journalism community here in our area or anywhere else that you might be affiliated with, write those questions and comments down, and we'll be collecting them as the program goes on. I do have a few questions of my own, and we'll start, since we're already over there by David, we'll start over on that end. David, tell me, what's one thing you wish the public better understood about how local newsrooms work today?
I think that, you know, a key thing that people need to understand is that journalists actually verify information. They don't just regurgitate information. You know, of course, we get press releases that we might rewrite and post on our website, and have a relationship with the sources, and so we have an understanding of the accuracy of the information. But what we really need is people who will go out and gather news, and you can't do that with artificial intelligence. There are people who are testing using artificial intelligence to take a video from a city council meeting. You can translate it into text. You can have the AI can summarize it for you. And there are people who are testing doing that as a way to produce journalism. To me, that's only going to get you, basically it's a stenographer. It's not really going to be somebody who's going to challenge, who's going to ask questions, who's going to verify the information. And so I think what people need to understand is, you know, these are trained professional people who are trying to gather information and translate it. And that doesn't always sense serious information. It's fun stories. One of our funnest stories this year was we had a huge outbreak of dragonflies in Springfield, and everybody was talking about it. And so we had a freelance reporter who knows a little bit about science and nature, did an excellent story, and we had a photographer who got a lot of great photos of dragonflies, and it was really a great talk about kind of story, but it put meat on the bones of what everybody was hearing about. But I'll give you another example. Tomorrow we will be publishing a story about emergency room wait times at the two major hospitals in Springfield. Anecdotally, if you around town, I was in an emergency room earlier this year. I waited about 6.5 hours to finally be seen, and after I was seen, I waited another 3.5 hours for the doctor to finally dismiss me. But beyond the anecdotes, a reporter goes out and gets the actual data and the information and finds out that, for instance, in one of the hospitals, 1 out of 8 people leaves the emergency room without being seen. that's putting meat on the bones of the anecdote that people in the community talk about. And so that's what a journalist does.
Thanks, David. Let's go to Kathy next. George and I were talking before the program and wondering, like, how many people these days with the decline in local media coverage even know a journalist? So what would you tell people, what do you wish people understood about how a newsroom works on a day-to-day basis?
I think that answer may have changed over time. Newsrooms used to be a place, particularly newspaper newsrooms, were a place where reporters actually became pretty much experts on the topic that they covered. They were specialists. Now, it was the broadcast journalists who were more the generalists. I mean, they covered stories. They didn't really necessarily always have beats, except maybe the sports guys. But they covered, had to cover everything. Now, most journalists in most newsrooms are generalists to a greater extent, and they have to know a little bit about a lot of things. But yeah, I appreciated Dave's answer, because that is absolutely the case. And I do think that people do understand to some extent that when they see a reporter at a meeting, they sort of understand what it is that they're doing. One thing that I think people may have lost track of, however, is the difference between news coverage and opinion. I don't know about you guys, but when I was in 4th grade, we had a unit on the parts of the newspaper. And the news was in one part of the newspaper, and the opinion was all in, basically in one section. Now, if you turn on the TV, your news and your opinion are inextricably linked. You've got cable news stations, which actually literally put more talking head news commentary or spin than they do actually reporting the news. And that's actually a fact, and it's an economic phenomenon. It's the reason having talking heads are a lot cheaper than actually going out and reporting and sending reporters out and camera operators and being on site and covering the news. And so, I mean, I think just to circle back, actual news coverage is a lot more expensive than somebody just standing up and spouting their opinion or giving their hot take on the news. You have to spend resources, and that is why when we're talking about the business model, we're talking about the need to pay for actual quality news. Opinion talk is cheap. News is not.
So do you want my opinion?
Chris, you're out in our community every day. You must hear a lot of the misconceptions that people have about how news works. Tell us about WKBT.
Well, it was interesting. David was talking about 5% of people in Springfield, Missouri to pay that subscription fee. And, it seems like, well, that should be easy to do, and it's not. Where you ended up, Kathy, news is expensive. Quality journalism is expensive, no matter really what format you're talking about, whether it's newspaper and digital publications, whether it be television, whether it be radio and podcasting is pretty simple, pretty cheap. So what I don't think they understand is that and I'm not a not-for-profit, right? I'm a for-profit business. But news is our biggest expense at the station, by far. I think people, we have freedom of speech in this country, we have freedom of the press. I think people take for granted that journalism will just be there, because it's pretty much always been there. It changes, goes through, TV didn't exist 100 years ago, radio's been around, 80, 90 years, whatever. Newspaper's been around since Ben Franklin. But you just kind of like, well, hey, if I want to watch the 6 o'clock news, all I got to do is turn it on. Or if I want to go to the website, it'll just be there. Or if I want to, get my paper at the end of the driveway, it will just be there, because that's kind of what we all expected. So I don't think people understand that. I'll just speak for television. I have a rudimentary understanding of the other mediums, but television is really expensive. Running that tower up in Galesville, we have hearing this, we have a pretty large newsroom here, which I'm proud of. We've grown it over the last 6 years since I've been there, since COVID. I don't think people understand that. What I'd want them to know is that it just doesn't happen. There's a lot that goes into it, from the morning editorial meeting to the afternoon editorial meeting. Where are we going to spend our resources? As I said earlier, my market goes up to Eau Claire. Do I want to send a reporter to Eau Claire? Because it's going to cost me money to send a reporter to Eau Claire. But is it worth it? Should I do it? Should I send somebody up to Winona or over, even outside, weather, weather technology? We track storms that go, way before it gets here and way, until it gets well outside of our area. So, it's a business that, again, it's a public service. It is something that we have a mission, as I talked about earlier, but, we need the support of them to make it happen.
Chris, what is your newsroom, or comparing to other newsrooms that you, in your various management capacities, have been affiliated with, as you said, not as a journalist necessarily, but what are they not covering now that they used to cover in the past?
So, I think the biggest change, with newspapers issues, you talk about expense. I mean, I subscribe to the La Crosse Tribune. I think I pay $83 a month for a monthly subscription to the La Crosse Tribune for 3 days. And of course they have, a paper. I'm not beating up on it, but what's quick math on that? Almost $1,000 a year to get your newspaper. I used to deliver the paper, and it was, I think I collected like $3 from people for the month. So, what's happened in newspaper is that they had their beats, as you said. They became experts in whatever they were reporting on. So if it was police and fire, or city hall, or county, or healthcare, or education, whatever it might be. We're not perfect by any means. But what we've tried to do, I came up here from Memphis. I was in Memphis 6 years before that. Again, not in the newsroom, but in other markets, is that we've tried to kind of fill that void of covering some of those beats that newspapers just can't do anymore. And we're going to have to get creative in how we do it. AI was brought up, and AI is a real thing. AI is not all bad, I think, when it comes to journalism. For instance, one of the ways to fill that void for not just my station or other stations or a radio group or whatever the case may be, AI can't ask a question, being in that council room or courthouse or whatever, but there are ways, I believe, to create scale and efficiency with AI that can bring us the information. So for instance, if you got city council meetings going on in Trempealeau and Galesville and La Crosse and Viroqua, there's going on all the time, and there is not the manpower to get people to all of those council meetings every week. And the smaller local papers aren't there anymore. There's no doubt about it. That part of the news desert is real. There are ways to still get, if anybody's been on a call recently, as soon as you get off the call, you get a synopsis of your call like that. And there are ways to get that information into your newsroom and then have your trained journalists follow up on that information and ask those questions and still do that service to the community, but you don't necessarily have to be there in person, but there has to be that follow-up. If there's something of substance to report, sometimes there is nothing to report in those newsrooms. or those council meetings, or something like that.
Kathy, what about you? What do you see previous coverage areas that maybe aren't part of the newsroom anymore?
So part of what State's newsroom does is each of its editors, like me in Iowa, have built up newsrooms based in part on what stories are not being covered in their communities. And so when we put together Iowa Capital Dispatch, I mean, we knew we needed a reporter at the State House, not because there weren't any reporters at the State House, but because there weren't enough. We wanted a reporter to cover ag and environment because there are actually more now. There are more nonprofits focused on ag and environment now than there were even when we launched almost 6 years ago. But there weren't very many covering ag and environment on a statewide basis. So we created a beat focused on that. We created a beat. This came along a little bit later, but we got a grant from Report for America to hire a reporter to cover higher education full-time. And that turned out to be a really important decision for us. There was only one other reporter in the entire state covering higher education as a full-time beat. Most education reporters really were spending most of their time on K-12, for obvious reasons. But and the only other reporter in the state had University of Iowa in their backyard. They were really they were really a University of Iowa reporter, not really covering higher ed as a statewide beat. And no sooner did we put that beat in place, but our legislators started basically working to scrub diversity, equity, and inclusion out of higher education. We've had 2 years of that now. We're creating a freedom of speech institutes at state universities, and public support for universities in terms of taxpayer dollars is taking a nosedive. So we created that beat at the right time, and not just the state universities, but nobody was covering private colleges as a statewide beat. Nobody was covering, they might be covering their own community college, but not covering the statewide system. So that was a choice that we made to focus on. Now, there are still lots of gaps, and I think the biggest ones and the most daunting ones, the most difficult to fill right now, are community news. So, who's covering the Nevada, Iowa City Council, because the Ames Tribune next door sure as heck is not.
David, what about you?
Yeah, so a key thing that when we created the Daily Citizen was we actually were aiming to fill the gaps that were being left behind by the legacy newspaper in particular. We do have a City Hall reporter. They had a City Hall reporter. But for instance, we started covering the county commission, the publicly run city utilities, et cetera, and those entities were shocked to have a newspaper reporter or a news reporter show up at their doorstep. But I'd want to focus on one key gap that I think is pretty persistent across local news, which is in-depth investigative kind of reporting. Now, that's obviously the specialty of Wisconsin Watch, and I'm sure George can talk a lot more about that than I can. But that was a key thing that we wanted to do in Springfield, was bring back in-depth reporting. So I mentioned the hospital story that we're publishing tomorrow as an example of that. Part of the reason I came back to La Crosse in 2014 and left the news business was because the signals that I were getting from Gannett at that time were pretty clear, which is that was really great stuff that you did on this project and that project, but it's just not generating traffic on the website, which is true. Our in-depth stories do not do as well as the Dragonfly story. But when you see how many people read it, it's a fewer readers, but they spend a lot more time on that in-depth story. So key thing that we're trying to fill is in-depth reporting. So taking a look at an issue, talking to multiple, when I say in-depth, what I mean is multiple sources. So not just do 2 interviews and write up what you've got. You're also looking for documentation. You're looking for different ways of presenting information. And again, this is sort of the specialty of Wisconsin Watch, but that's a key part of what we wanted to do in Springfield, was fill that gap.
Thanks. So I want to ask each of you about your biggest operational challenge in your, you each have different business models and you each have different obstacles to overcome every day. Is it as simple as funding, or let's start with David, since you've already got your mic. What's your biggest operational challenge?
It's a combination. Certainly funding, our long-term plan is to have roughly, like our budget this year is about $1.6 million. Our goal is to have roughly a third, 35% of that funded through subscriptions, say 45% funded through what you might think of as advertising. We call it sponsorships. So it's a mix of people who want to support our mission, and they get some value of advertising in return. And then roughly 15 to 20% would be ongoing donations. As a nonprofit, that's the one advantage we have over traditional for-profit media, is we can accept donations. I mean, they could accept donations too, but we can give you the ability to write it off on your taxes if you're in that position. So operationally, certainly funding is a key thing. Also, just frankly, hiring and maintaining good staff. That has proven to be a big challenge, not so much on the news side. We've actually had a very stable news staff, but on our business side, it's been a really difficult challenge. Some of it may be, nonprofits typically don't pay quite as well, but we pay competitively in our market. We offer a benefits package, and a lot of nonprofits don't do that. So, but maintaining the staff, finding good people, keeping good people is a key operational challenge.
Kathy, what about Iowa?
So certainly funding, that is something, no nonprofit can take your donors for granted. And with States Newsroom, our national organization does the heavy lift in terms of raising the money for all of the salaries and overhead in terms of like rent for an office. And then I, as a local editor, raise the money for basically everything else. To send a reporter to a training program, or to, out of town for a story, or to hire an intern, or, for freelancers, or I raised the money so we could have a better camera, so we didn't all have to take pictures with our cell phones. So that is an ongoing challenge, and it's actually becoming more of a challenge because actually there's more competition in the not-for-profit space, including from for-profit media outlets. We have, and some of these efforts I actually do support. We've got a group of small Western Iowa newspapers that just weren't going to make it on their own, and so they created a foundation just to help them, to keep their doors open, and so I think that's a worthy effort. But I also have heard firsthand about our local Gannett operation, trying to raise money through donations to hire an intern, and that kind of makes me wrinkle my nose a little bit. The other thing I'll just mention is AI. Because I do think this is something that it's evolving faster than we can really learn about it. We are currently in our organization sort of trying to work on guidelines for reporters and editors about first of all, how not to get fooled by AI. So our credibility and, is everything to us, and not being fooled by fake news that comes our way is ultimately important. But secondly, to maintain the trust of our readers, to use AI in a way that is responsible, in a way that, might, I think there are, so like just as an example, I had a reporter who was trying to quickly synthesize a list of 150 lawmakers and list them by party. I think she was just doing a roll call vote. And, AI did a great job with that. She had to fact check it very carefully. But AI saved her a lot of time. That just a one query. But, I had a personal experience. I was at a golf tournament, and there was a golfer that I had seen in town the night before who wasn't playing. And so I was looking for, the roster and looking for online, and I was getting this Google AI summary at the top, which was telling me the results of this golf tournament that was still underway. And I was like, oh, this can't be right. So I think, in addition to the challenges of raising money and keeping an operation going, we've got this looming issue of technology that started with the internet and is now continuing through AI.
Same question?
Yes.
What David said earlier about investigative reporting, I think that's the most expensive journalism, that you can do. And we don't do it because it's really expensive. I would love to do it, and I haven't been able to get there, so kudos to you, and you're right, more people. Way of, like you were talking about with the roll call, and I'll get into what I think about a lot, is, if you're a reporter or you're a producer, for us, it goes on the news, over the air. It's also going to go on our website. It's also going to go on Facebook. It's also going to go on Twitter or X. It's also going to go on Instagram. It's also going to go on TikTok. It's also going to go on our streaming channel. It's going to go all these places. And so writing headlines and slugs for all of those is really, really time consuming. So it's not rewriting the story, and there has to be guardrails. But, having an AI tool write you a slug that's appropriate for Facebook and one that's appropriate for Instagram is just a way to, that reporter would spend an hour doing that in a way that it can be done just in a few minutes and doesn't affect the journalism at all. Things that I think about a lot is, I had an interesting conversation with Steve O'Malley when I first got to town, and just the changes in media. He was the LaCrosse County administrator for a long time. I'm sure many of you know him. And just the changes in media, kind of like what we're talking about tonight. And, he made a comment, something, not everybody watches the 6 o'clock news like they used to. And it's true. Not everybody, I wish they did. I wish it was 1969 and everybody was watching 6 o'clock news like they did back then. So what I think about a lot is I say this all the time, is that it's not the audience's job to find us, it's our job to be where they are. And we're not putting the genie back in the bottle. People aren't going to read the newspaper cover to cover anymore. People's attention spans have changed. Test yourself. And the last time you read a 10,000 page word story, it's really, really hard to concentrate that long, or maybe it's just me.
It's not just you.
Okay, good. Catching people's attention, cutting through the clutter. In advertising, we used to say people see more ads in one day today than somebody at the turn of the 20th century saw in 1 year. You said it earlier, we're bombarded with information from everywhere, every day. And so our job, it's something that we spend an inordinate amount of time on, but it's really important, is, yeah, we know not everybody's watching us on linear broadcast television anymore. We still have a bunch, and thank you, and we always want more. But, we have to populate a website. We have to be on all the digital platforms. social media platforms. We've launched 2 streaming channels. So if you go on Roku or Chromecast or however, whatever smart television you have, we're putting content out there and feeding that beast. I wish I was around for the Mad Men days in the 60s. I wasn't, but, just putting 2 or 3 newscasts on a day, or I say just, the newspaper was bigger, or just printing that newspaper each day. There is so much to keep track of when you're a news organization, and all the platforms that you have to be on, all the logistics of it, hitting a button and going to the right places, the agreements that you have with the right vendors, and then the vendors are always changing. Vendors aren't cheap either. So, and then, they want to steal the audience from you and take the ad revenue because Facebook wants to keep it or Google wants to keep it. So even when you create the content, they steal it, publish it, and serve the ads on it as well. So that's our battle.
All right, you can keep that. So we have really wonderful questions. Thank you all very much, not only for being here, but for your participation through the wonderful questions that I have up here. In the interest of making sure that we get to as many of them as possible, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a question, and I'm just going to use my own executive privilege to pick a person to answer it, so that we can get to more of them. And I want to start with George, because he's been so patiently listening to our conversation. George Stanley from Wisconsin Watch gets our first question. George, how do you educate community members, your readers, the public, people who consume your news products, on how to spot fake news, how to spot AI-generated content, how to spot things that purport to be, as you alluded to in your remarks, things that purport to be from nonpartisan news sources that really aren't at all?
That's a great question, and it's not easy to do sometimes. And one thing there are a lot of fake, or I shouldn't say fake, there's a lot of partisan news sites in our state because we're one of those 7 key battleground states that have really good names. Like one of them has Dairyland in their name, and things like that seem like they're local. So what I do just to check them out is use some keywords that are propaganda used by one of the political parties, either one, because they're both out there. And if it's the type of stuff that either group of politicians is saying, see if they're saying it on that site a lot, and if it's in their headlines, and if they're repeating what you see on the ads. And you'll notice these sites really pop up and suddenly are there during election years, even more than non-election years. So that's one way of doing it. We're finding out, this is kind of shocking to me because I'm old, but we're finding out how little people know about how things work now when you're young. We have community listeners, and in Milwaukee we were doing an election guide, and one of the community listeners said, that's great, that's all great, but you better tell them what the mayor does because most people don't know. And you think, what? And we found out that that's not only true in Milwaukee, it's true in Green Bay and Appleton too. A lot of people don't know who's responsible for what. The mayor does this, the city council does this, the county board does this. They don't know. Their legislators do this. So we're trying to learn from that, and we're doing something called translation. And we're using people that really know how to use social media for people who are under 30. One thing I heard that I think might be pretty true is that websites are to people under 30, the Z generation, what printed newspapers were to the millennials. They don't go to websites anymore. They search on TikTok and Instagram and follow people. They follow people that they trust on TikTok and Instagram. So we're trying to teach people they trust to take our stories and give them trustworthy versions of it and translate what's going on. So a great example was After Doge was a big thing, when Elon Musk was in the White House every day and talking about slashing spending, and at the federal level, one of the state legislators here in Wisconsin decided that's a great idea, we're going to do it at the state level too, and created something called the GOAT Committee. And I forget what it stands for. But anyway, it was the same thing as Doge at the state level and got a lot of publicity for it. Well, we did a story that explains we have a nonprofit legislative audit bureau in Wisconsin, and it is constantly looking for ways to be more efficient and saving money. It gets praise from both parties, just won a national award for doing such a good job encouraging government efficiency. It's not, both parties use it, and it even has a hotline, and it even has teeth if it finds fraud and waste and things like that. So what does this add for us? What does this, or is it just out there to score political points? And that's what we're asking people on social media to think about when we present, this is how it actually works, and this is what we already have. What are they trying to do? Are they trying to help us as taxpayers, or are they just scoring political points? So that's a new way that we're trying to reach people who really don't know how government works these days.
Thanks. David, let's go to you. What opportunities do you see for independent journalists in the future of media?
What opportunities for independent journalists?
Yeah, so I'm envisioning this question being about you. There's been discussion here today about some of the nonprofit news outlets that have been started by individuals who maybe used to be part of a newspaper or a television network or something like that. What about people who are not part of a big newsroom?
You know, or people who are maybe following somebody on Substack as a
Sure.
opportunity. I think that there definitely are opportunities for independent journalists, and actually just kind of reflecting on something George was just saying, you know, most of the people who read stories from the Springfield Daily Citizen don't actually visit the website first. They don't go to what we call the homepage of the website. They come to a story from either a link in a newsletter or social media or et cetera. So the same question, the way I would answer this is that the answer applies equally to independent journalists as well as to journalists who are associated with an organization, which is you have to develop your own brand. You know, and part of what the brand we want to own is that we're credible, that we're a nonpartisan, credible source of information. And so, but you know, like we have a columnist who has quite a large personality, and we want him to use that personality because that draws people in. At the same time, he's also, you know, a journalist that's trying to verify information, make sure he's got factual information. So I think there is an opportunity for independent journalists through organizations like Substack or other places, but in a lot of it just comes down to having their own credibility and be able to draw people in.
Kathy, I want to read this question, which is, the question is, what's happening with journalism departments at our local universities? What needs to change? But in addition to that, like people going into journalism, do they still go get a bachelor's degree in journalism and then get a master's degree in journalism? Full disclosure, I don't have any degree in journalism.
So I have been an adjunct journalism instructor at Iowa State University, which is my alma mater. And so I've been in touch with them and paid attention to as they are trying to evolve. I mean, they have some of the same challenges as the newspaper industry in the sense of the dollars aren't necessarily there for the technology that they need to prepare journalists for the, you know, for today's newsrooms. So a lot of the challenges go into finding the resources so that we can have, laptops, for example, for students, or that, we can use bring in these AI tools so we can teach reporters how to use them. I'll tell you what, when I took my Journalism 201 class, which is the class that I ended up teaching at Iowa State many years later, the technology was manual typewriters that the bodies of them were cast iron. I think they must have been like manufactured in the 20s or something, and the keys were so stiff that you had to punch them like this. And we had I don't know if any of you experienced this, but we had copy paper, yellow copy paper that you had carbon paper that you had to make a copy for your professor, your editor. And I was a really good student and a good writer, but I almost flunked that class because I could not type on that. And then, I would go to the student newspaper after class, and they actually did have some rudimentary computers, and I would punch those keys like, I thought I was gonna break the thing. It was crazy. But, today, the problems are the same. You have to have money for technology, and things are evolving so fast, it's really difficult to figure out what it is that you should be teaching. Iowa State University brings in professionals in the industry all the time to ask, what is it that we should be teaching students? So I think it is a concern. And I do want to say one thing about social media, because I think, even 5 years ago, we were really seriously relying on social media to reach readers that we were not reaching. But we can't control the algorithms of those social media platforms, and some of them have become increasingly hostile to news. So we can post our news stories all day long, and I still do, but how many people see them is completely out of my hands. So that social media is a threat in more ways than one. And so as we're teaching our students, how to be social media influencers, we are maybe cutting our own throats when it comes to actual dissemination of news.
Chris, you talked before about all the places, the reporter goes to their story, they write their story. That's not the end of the day for them anymore. They gotta post on Facebook. They gotta make a carousel for Instagram. They gotta do a TikTok. They gotta do all these things. This question comes in that vein. In the world of podcasts, TikTok, and other entertainment outlets, how has local news attempted to meet the public where they are when it comes to consuming content and news, especially considering younger generations and the seemingly deteriorating attention spans that were brought up earlier?
Yeah, great question. That's what I worry about every day, and I'm getting older too. So, what she just said about social media is true. Like, the algorithms were stacked for us, and then Zuckerberg decided he didn't want to be in the local news business anyway, and he turned it off, which makes a big difference because, a lot of people get their local content from that. What you said, George, I think about what a website is, is the newspaper to a 30-year-old. Yikes. Look, what we try to do is put our content everywhere that we can put it. The hard part about the business aspect of that is monetizing that content. That's the hard part. As we kind of went through the HD transition in television, we used to joke about analog dollars and digital dimes, because you had so much money wrapped up in analog news or having a Packers game or whatever. By the way, if I had Packers on 52 weeks a Sunday, I wouldn't have any money problems in Wisconsin. It's not really digital dimes. It's pennies and half a pennies, and getting kind of like royalties, if you're a music performer on radio, getting, you know, like 0.000025% per play, you know. So there is no answer other than that you have to, every day, every year, try to make some guesses on where the best place for your content is. Somebody brought up TikTok down there. I think, George, you were talking about you guys doing a TikTok story. That's really hard in local news. How do you TikTok a story about tax increases? How do you TikTok a story about a bad weather event? How do you TikTok, and I'm not on TikTok, I kind of refuse to be on it for some principled reasons, you know, who owns it and a number of other things. But I know it's there. It's one of the largest video platforms out there. We're on it, but it's really super hard to reach that. You know, I got two 17-year-olds and a 15-year-old. You know, with what happened last week with the assassination, I mean, they didn't catch it from television or the radio or a website. Like, that went through the high school fast, no matter what side you were on it. And most of it was TikTok, Snapchat, you know, those type of different social media channels. So I guess to summarize, you have to be there, you have to try. Like, we post everything, everywhere, news app, weather app. You know, I talked about our new streaming channel. So if somebody doesn't have cable anymore, they don't have DirecTV or satellite television anymore, this market's really interesting. We have about 35% of our viewers that get television with an antenna. Sounds old-fashioned, but it's free. Doesn't cost you anything more than the antenna. But you have to try to be on these different platforms to recruit an audience, to get out to an audience that, if you don't, may never sample your product. You have no conquest into that audience if they're not even aware of what you do. And you just can't take for granted anymore that people go, oh yeah, News 8, WKBT, you know, that's my local station. I'm gonna tune in and watch them 2 or 3 times a week, or go to wherever their stuff, you know, wherever their content might be. You know, like, we gotta be in front of them when they turn on the Roku with a Roku ad saying, hey, don't forget to watch us, or here's what you can get, or you can, you know, customize your own newscast and so forth.
All right, thank you very much. And please join me in thanking the entire panel and George and everyone. Thank you. Let me welcome Rusty Cunningham here, who's going to have some closing remarks.
Nearly 12,000 amendments have been, only 27 have been enacted. Here's the First Amendment, 45 powerful words. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. We have lost more than 3,300 newspapers in the United States in the last 20 years. As you've heard this evening, there are business models that allow journalists to continue providing the watchdog function that remains crucial to democracy. New York Times publisher A.G. Sulzberger told a group of reporters Monday, when journalists are kept from providing independent information to the public, it becomes far easier for those in power to act with impunity. Consider what the late Charlie Kirk wrote a year ago about the notion of suppressing speech. Quote, hate speech does not exist legally in America. There's ugly speech, there's gross speech, there's evil speech, and all of it is protected by the First Amendment. Keep America free, end quote. Presidential biographer John Meacham wrote, in the wake of Kirk's killing, "Does a reprehensible crime against a political figure lead to more reprehensible acts, or does it remind us that we have to be able to live with people whose opinions we despise without resorting to violence?" As Meacham writes, if this is open season on everybody who expresses an opinion, then the American covenant is broken, end quote. In the spirit of Constitution Day, please embrace the spirit of the First Amendment and the ideal of nonviolent disagreement. Thanks again to our wonderful presenters, some of whom I've worked with for more than 35 years, and very proud of what they do and continue to mean to democracy. Thanks to Viterbo's Ethics Institute and to Leader Ethics for your continued leadership. Now, to wrap things up, please welcome the founder and executive director of Leader Ethics, Lee Rosh.
Well, I got to start up by just thanking you for taking time out of your day to come here and to listen to the program this evening. And I hope that you found it to be informative and thoughtful. I also want to thank all of our speakers here because of their time tonight and the information they're sharing, but most importantly, because of the important work that they're involved with right now. Despite all the noise that you hear from Washington or the national media or all the global issues that are out there, in reality, the United States is still a country that's built around the states and local communities. This is where the action is that can drive change. This has happened in the past, and it can happen again, needs to happen again now. So I have one more final assignment for you. We are at Viterbo, of course, and that is you probably picked up this handout here, and there is a website address and a QR code here, and I'm encouraging you to go online and complete a short survey. Because we want to take that information and we want to compile it and then put it out publicly in the upcoming weeks so that we can share your insights and your questions with the greater community as a whole. So again, thank you for taking time out of your schedules today and being part of the solutions. Best wishes. Have a great evening. Thank you.